Dear Asian people, you are now white. This is something I've been saying for many years, but I think with the recent controversy, this is absolutely proven without a doubt that Asian people, of course, especially East Asian people, like Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, are viewed as adjacently white or just straight up white, basically, like, by a certain demographic. In this video here, I will explain why that is, right? Why is East Asian people in particular viewed as white people? Why do they hate Asian people? Because they actually really do. And last year, I made a video about why certain people like Hamas, right? Which is not a very good thing, of course, but there's a huge similarity, straight up, why some people dislike Jews and why they usually also dislike then Asian people, right? There's a massive overlap in those two categories, especially, of course, with recent, world events, so to speak, right? Recent news, of course, last year and so on. You can see the overlap is very, very massive. And as a side note, right, I am a behavioral scientist. I'm a scientist of many things, actually. My primary science is actually AI behavior science, not strictly human science, but I have a degree, of course, in behavioral science as a baseline, right? And I've been saying this for many, many years. I'm an expert on analyzing people's behavior and predictive behavior, and I'm an expert on game theory. So, like Prisoner's Dilemma, Stag Hunt, and so on. And that's where I spend most of my time, actually, when I work and predicting how people are going to behave, right? So, for me, certainly, it's almost kind of boring, honestly. What do you mean? It's kind of boring. Because you probably heard this before, right? But I can tell you that I can read a comment from someone on Reddit or Twitter or whatever, right? And I can basically immediately know, oh, that guy is pro-Hamas, and he also hates Japanese people. It's a very, very huge similarity there. But anyway, let me give the context for this part here. This video will be about, of course, then Asian, white. We won't talk about that, the other issue in this video, I suppose. And first of all, then, the context, right, is that Japanese people are now white. Throw away your katanas, guys. You can't use them anymore. But don't worry, we white people, we also have our own swords. Damn, baby, this is actually a sword from my ancestors, an actual saber that my great-great-great-grandfather used. I'm actually from like a warrior noble clan in Sweden, whatever, who cares. My point is that the Yasuke thing is a great showcase of the controversy that apparently Japanese people are not white, right? So what I mean is that it's not so much interesting for me that if he was a samurai or not. Of course he wasn't, and I made a video about it a few years ago. He literally was not a samurai. He didn't have a title, whatever, I digress. That's not the video. What I'm more interested in is that I see now then, for the last few days, several, tweets, interviews, all this different stuff, right, with people working at Ubisoft and other people, of course, in that surrounding, defending them, agree with them, and so on. Basically, and this is what I mean is a big kicker, right, that you are not this thing anymore, you're white now, is because, of course, they're saying that, no, well, we don't want to have another white main character, we don't want to have another, white samurai, so we picked the black guy instead. You're like, wait, what? Wait, what do you mean? So, what they actually are saying, right, and I mean it literally, they are saying that they couldn't have a Japanese male main character, because that's white, right? That is too white. So we want to have a black guy doing it instead. And what the hell is that, right? What is that? But that is actually what they're saying. And I bring it up again, not because I really don't care that much that Yasuke was a samurai, not so to speak, right? I bring it up, like I say, because it's a great example of this, like, well, but Japanese people, they're basically white, right? So we can just ignore them, yeah, like, we care about those guys. It's a lot like that, right? They tend to do this thing for the last 20 or so years, maybe the last 30 years. But, I mean, the big example for me, right, in over the years is, of course, the whole Harvard case, right? So in America, in US colleges, you have a lot of, like, affirmative action, right? Who gets into college, right? And of course, I'm not gonna go into much here because you probably already heard about this thing. It's been going on for many years, and a lot of what people have mentioned before. But the basic of it is that It's much, much harder, right? Being East Asian in particularly, getting into college in America, because of course there are a lot of like Chinese, Japanese, and so on, Korean, right? In college they do very, very well, which of course means that they have harder time getting in because it goes against them that they're all having great grades and great whatever statistics and so on. It's a go against them, right? And it's easier than being black and Latino or whatever getting into the colleges. This has been a lot of discussion about this thing, and there's been some court cases and so on, right? So that I would say is probably the best, more like I'll say it, out in the real world example of this thing, where it's like, yeah, that thing looks really, really weird. And I mean, as a background for that, right? Like I said, obviously, East Asian people do fairly a lot better, right, than other people do in America. For example, they have a higher average salary. They have a higher average, like say, marriage time span or whatever. Yeah, it's like they get divorced less, right? They have more stable income, stable house, stable upbringing, all this stuff, right? They can of course go into the different arguments why it's happening or whatever. There's a lot of different factors why it's probably happening. But one thing I think is very certainly true why it's happening is of course because East Asian people, and Asians in general, but especially East Asian, again, then, like Chinese and so on, value education. Right? They value education. They tell the children that get a good grade is important, stay in school, get a good grade, don't drink, don't do drugs, so on, stay in school. It's much more an important idea in the culture in East Asia, of course, and that, generally makes them have, their children has better schooling and so on. Right? There's other factors too, for that matter. My personal favorite way to explain how to raise a kid, right, is about delayed gratification. I don't want to talk too much about here, but I've done a lot of I will paper this. I've done a lot of before. I will try to make it short here now because this is my favorite part of education. But delayed gratification, right, is usually the marshmallow test, where you test like a 4-year-old if they understand how I say it. Do you understand that if I give you one marshmallow now, or if you wait 15 minutes, you get two instead, right? If a 4-year-old can then wait for that 15 minutes, they can pass the marshmallow test, which in actuality isn't the marshmallow, it's more like your favorite candy. So usually you ask the kid, I have these candies, which one do you want? You can have two if you wait and so on, but I digress. But the thing is that testing, of course, your delayed gratification. And it's been proven without any doubt that children that are much better at this will do better in life in general because they're better at school, they're better at education, blah, blah, so on. Right? The reason why, of course, is because, how do I say it, they value to pass a grade. I think it's the best way to look at it. Basically, if you have very high delayed gratification, you might think that, well, today is a party. I'm going to have this really cool party to go to. However, it's a test tomorrow. I'm going to do the test first and party tomorrow. That's a very best, but that's how it's like, They're much better at, say, motivating themselves to, you know what, I'm going to study instead because I need to pass this exam or whatever, right? That's kind of the very basic of it. However, if we extrapolate this thing of delayed gratification and why, for example, certain cultures feature way worse, right, in America, the big reason why is because delayed gratification is gained by having stable house, right? Basically, if your parents are married, if your parents are honest to you. So basically, if a kid grows up in a family where they lie to the kid, right? Like the parents are, divorced and they're fighting or whatever, they're not as truthful to the child will grow up not trusting authority as much, not trusting tests as much as so on, not trusting school as much. It's a very, very clear correlation between growing up in a two-household family where the parents are honest and reliable to the child, right? That's going to give the child a much higher delayed gratification, which of course then turns out having better schools or whatever. So you can see kind of how that kind of lose background in American context, right? And again, then East Asian people, of course, I would say they just perform way better because, for example, in Japanese culture, you don't get divorced, right? In Japanese culture, you stay married until the kids are grown up. So yeah, if anything, almost too much in Japanese culture, I would argue for. It's like, no, we don't get divorced. No, we have to stay for the kids, right? But as a culture, when it comes to education and getting a higher salary or whatever, right, that is actually a pretty good cultural notion. You might have an unhappy marriage, I suppose, but it is better for your kids because, again, stable house means the kid have a better, higher delayed gratification control, which means they're going to be better at school and so on. So it's a very clear thing from a cultural standpoint, right? Why East Asian cultures perform better in America and also other countries, of course. Now, if we then go into why are they hated then by, of course, the certain demographic, right? The whole white adjacency thing, because you're basically white now, right? There are a couple of factors why. I always love this, what's it called, this, oh my god, this thing when they, from the Jeffersonian, when they were like, oh yeah, keeping time, getting on meeting on time and so on. There's a white thing right there. It's like all this like working hard, work ethics. It's a white thing. That thing is one of the dumbest things ever been published, I would say, from any people ever, right? But it certainly tells you how they look at East Asian people, right, and other people in general. It's like a white thing is to be on time, or like working hard is a white thing, right? And that's kind of comes into what I mentioned earlier with the Yasuke thing, right? Again, not so important that he was a samurai or not, right? Rather that it's like, well, I mean, we can replace a Japanese guy because they're basically white. Because Japanese people in general are good at, again, then of course, working hard. Work ethics, right, is something that's very, very prominent in Japanese culture. Staying on time, getting on time schedule, very important in Japanese culture. The only culture I know that is so like time management is Swedish culture. Swedish culture and Japanese culture is incredibly similar. So again, welcome to the white club, guys, because we're basically white. We're all white now. But seriously, I made a video about that a few years ago. Swedish culture and Japanese culture, if you look at the culture map, have the exact same value in one of the metrics. So Swedish and Japanese culture are very, very similar actually. And this usually is this point that are similar, like staying on time, standing in queue, work ethics, this kind of stuff is very, very Swedish as well, right? And certainly the Japanese then feels quite white, so they're basically white adjacent. But you can kind of see how, I suppose, people hate it, right? They hate them on that general notion because absolutely, certainly, does Japanese people especially remind me, as a guy that's been both in Japan and speak Japan, whatever. Yeah, they're very similar to the Scandinavian culture I'm from, right? And as a side note, I always loved animes like, for example, Yayi-sama and so on, right? And the reason why is because it is an anime, or a manga, of course, first then, based on this called Skadeglädje. Schadenfreude in German, but in Swedish called Skadeglädje. And the reason I like it is because Swedish comedy is actually very similar to like Yayi, like super similar. And I haven't seen that kind of like comedy standpoint, right? Except from like Japanese comedy and like Scandinavian comedy and a little bit German. So you can see, no, even the comedy aspect is quite similar. So if you talk about me personally, a reason perhaps that I grew up as a kid and started liking, manga and anime and whatever, right, from Japan and of course Japanese video games, might be because the comedy is actually quite similar between Sweden and Japan. Yeah, I mean literally, like it's actually very similar to Swedish comedy. Another good example is these shy animes, right? They have a lot like Komi-san, other animes where the characters are afraid of introverted, to talk to their neighbors and so on. That is incredibly Swedish. They're much more common in Sweden about avoiding your neighbors and the shy person and so on. They call it shy comedy. Very, very, very popular in Sweden. And again, then also quite popular in Japan. So, especially on a comedy aspect, Japan and Sweden is super similar. So I mean literally that. The cultures are actually very similar. Again, look at the culture map. Google cultural map. You will see like Sweden is in the top right corner and Japan is in the top middle. So it's like on one of the axes, Japan and Sweden are almost identical. And then of course Norway and so on is very close as well. And then like Korea and so on, right? So there are massive overlap in these cultures. Again, what does that mean then for a person that hates white culture? Well, it kind of means that, look at those Japanese over there. They're basically Swedes, right? They're basically the same culture. Especially in comedy. They're freaking similar, yeah. But I mean it, right? They are very, very similar. And I think that even from a, how do I say it, right? From a subconscious standpoint, I think a lot of people that again then hate white people, right? They will hate Japanese people. And of course, and also Chinese and so on, but especially Japanese people. Because, yeah, we are actually kind of similar in a lot of cultural aspect, right? And from a subconscious level, then they could recognize these patterns, and then they're like, oh yeah, f those people are they're the same as my enemies, right? They're gonna have that from like a bottom line standpoint, right? So that's kind of silly, but it is how it is, and I think that a large part of where the hate comes from is that they subconsciously recognize the many overlaps, right, between like old school European culture, so to speak, and old school like East Asian culture. But we are quite similar, especially standing in line. There's no other country in the world that people stand in lines properly as in Sweden or Japan. Like standing in line and keeping the distance and each other is exactly the same. You never talk to straight. Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, it seems exactly. And also one reason I say too is that, and this is even stronger in maybe in Norway and so on, but in Scandinavia especially, they believe in the government, right? They actually like love for the government, to believe that the government is correct and so on, and following the government in Scandinavia is massive, much higher than the rest of Europe, okay? Believing in the government is a very Scandinavian thing. Or, of course, also Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. Yeah, very similar to a much higher belief in your government, right? A much higher trust in your government, and a higher trust in your neighbor and so on, comes from that, right? And actually what kind of believe in your, like, the structure of society. And those kind of, I guess, is German too, also quite high on that. And of course, as a side note, I'm sorry to say to people that don't like white people, we're not all the same, okay? We're not all the same. Scandinavian culture is quite different than like Spanish culture. Spanish culture is similar to Greek culture. Portuguese culture is similar to Spanish culture and so on, right? They're not exactly the same. Of course, we have overlaps there too, right? But for example, Portugal is next to Spain, right? It's surrounded by Spain. They're obviously going to have more similar cultures, right? Mediterranean culture is basically quite different than Scandinavian culture. English culture is more similar to Scandinavian culture because of Protestant faith, right? Because the same religion rather than anything else, I would say. And so on. We talk about it. This video could be 10 hours of me explaining stuff, right? But I always love that on the European part, right? In Europe, when it comes to culture and people's behavior, it is very clear that you can do a very clear difference between if the country is Protestantic or Catholic, right? So if you look at the League Wars, which is in the 17th century, that's kind of the huge system of Europe, right? So Scandinavia, right, leading with Gustav II Adolf, was this like line of the north, right? It was the big forefront of Protestantic faith, and that kind of shaped the whole of the northern region, also the northern Germany, and so on, to be Protestantic faith, right? And then, of course, Tudor wanted to be divorced. He went Protestant, so on. If you can go into a lot of details, but basically, that's a huge difference in Europe, right? If you're a Protestant country or a Catholic country, that by far is the biggest difference from history and how it changed the behavior in our culture today. Then, absolutely 100%. And of course, then countries that are more Protestantic are also more willing to also be atheists, right, eventually. That's kind of we see in Scandinavia, especially in Norway. I think it was the first country really that was like removing all the church stuff and it's like all believing in government and so on. But anyway, I digress. There are high similarities, because actually going back then, right, to East Asia, a big similarity between, of course, Europe, especially in Scandinavia, right, and East Asia, is that they are also very secular, right? There's a huge overlap with that, and a quite similar historical aspect as well, right? But whatever. And also, as a side note, talking about Yasuke and samurai and so on, of course, I said in my Yasuke video, a huge similarity between Japan itself, right, and Europe is, of course, a feudal system, right? Japan has the feudal system for the longest. Obviously, samurais are feudal, the daimyo, the shogun, right? They have all the feudal system, which are called vassal states and so on, right? That was a huge thing as well in Europe, but nowhere else, right? There was no really like feudal system in America. There was no feudality in Africa really, nor in the other Asian parts. There's a very like Japanese thing and a very European thing. Again, huge overlap in a cultural standpoint, right? Of course, I guess you could argue that Man of Heaven from China and the Ming and so on is a feudal system, I suppose, but it's not really the same thing. So they're similar, but not the same thing. But certainly the other Asian countries that are also feudal are like Korea and Asia, and then China. So it's always right. It's a kind of overlap with the East Asian countries, rather than any other country. So that's just interesting from a general standpoint. I think it's very interesting, right? That based on like religion and culture and also the governmental system, countries like Japan are to a large extent more similar to European countries than it is, for example, to India or I don't know, Burma or something, or Myanmar, it's called now, but yeah, or Siam, Thailand, or whatever. Yeah, it's more similar to that. Even if they're closer to Siam, right? Even if Japan is located closer to Siam or Thailand, whatever you call it, it's more similar to Sweden than it is to Thailand, 100%. And so on, right? But of course there are other stuff that they have as an overlap. The Garuda in Thailand, right, is the symbol of Thailand, is the emperor symbol. In all the currency you have the Garuda. The Garuda is also a little bit shown in Japanese mythology, right? It's this huge bird, so shown the two. So of course there's an overlap, right, between culture and religion, like Buddhism then. So for example then, of course, in Thailand they're Buddhistic. In Japan they're also, to some extent, Buddhistic. That's a Shinto, right? But they're Buddhist and so on. And so certain like mythology from Hinduism then comes the Garuda, and you have this like overlap between the religions. But then I digress. So I'm not saying that it's like some kind of black hole in between like East Asia and Europe, but overall though they are more similar to Europeans, right? And that again comes back, as I mentioned earlier, that this is a kind of large reason why the certain people hate them, right? Because they can see that, well, the way Japanese people argue, the way they make their stuff and so on. And actually, from a general like nerd standpoint, right, behind me here, of course, you can forget about anime and manga now. We got comic books instead. We got Captain America, my favorite character in Marvel, Spider-Man's pretty cool too. But another thing that's actually quite similar to Europe and East Asian culture now is actually the gray zone view of heroes. This is true both in a historical aspect, mythologies, for example, the Romans of the Three Kingdoms, right, with Cao Cao and so on, whatever, we're into that now, but Li Bi and so on, yeah, but whatever. That's one thing, right? But how does that work then? Well, what I'm talking about is that in America, even though I have behind me now the Captain America and so on, I know, but in America, storylines, movies and books and so on, tend to be a lot more black and white, tend to be a lot more directly black and white. This is the bad guy, this is the good guy, right? But the European movies and books, especially comic books, are much more gray, so who's the bad guy, it's much more like Japanese anime and manga, also much more European, yeah. So European comics are much more similar to Japanese manga than they are to American comics, which is of course true then in a lot of ways, because what country is manga popular? France, right, and Belgium. Mangas are very, very popular on France because they have their own, comic book industry, which again is more similar to the Japanese industry than is the American industry. So there's a lot of overlap there, and that's actually probably one of the biggest overlap, I would say, between, so to speak, old school white culture, right, and East Asian culture, the whole idea of much more gray zone, less black and white, much more, who's the bad guy, contextual based, and the tendency to do like really long backstories, in anime. Yeah, we're gonna have a flashback, right? That's also more, European. We're gonna have a really long flashback. Yeah, that's way more European too than it is in, for example, America, and of course other countries too. But I think it's very interesting that part of the culture, right, in Europe is actually more similar to Japan than it is to America, even if they are both white cultures, right? Now then, let's get into the real deep thing here. Obviously, videos is a long video, I don't really care. But the real issue, and I probably should have mentioned it earlier, if I wanna be honest here, because this is much more important to understand, is that the whole white adjacency, right? As we keep saying, the white adjacency thing. Why are white people and so on? And so the deep issue of why they hate Asians, right, is because Asians disprove the idea of socioeconomical factors. Okay, so for a certain demographic, socioeconomic factors are incredibly important. Right? They love to blame that any crime rate or this thing or that thing or whatever is based on socioeconomical factors. Another way to look at it is called tabula rasa. It means blank slate theory, or a blank slate. So the idea is that if you're just born in a vacuum and you have no inherent, traits or abilities, it doesn't matter. Of course, that is completely, incredibly insane to believe in. Tabula rasa is an incredible, stupid thing to believe in. but the left loves it, right? They have this love of it that's like, oh, everyone is born without anything. It completely is not been proven at all. And everyone knows that DNA matters, right? Like, my dad is tall, okay? My grandpa was a giant. He was like freaking 2 meters. He's like 7 feet, man. Like, all my family. My mom is tall, for a woman, right? So to speak, right? And I'm Swedish. I'm half Swedish Norwegian. Everyone in my family is tall, right? So I'm pretty tall too. I'm pretty tall. I'm pretty big. I got a huge, frame. I weigh a lot. I weigh like 300 pounds. I'm a big dude, right? I got big hair, big beard. My dad got a beard. It's like, of course, DNA matters, right? This is Christ, man. But the idea with tabula rasa is that DNA doesn't matter. It has no value. There's just no inherent skills or attributes exist for people. I keep saying it. There's, of course, absolutely zero evidence for that. Of course, people inherit traits and skills and look and behavior from their family, from their genes. That's how everything works. Also not for humans, but also for dogs and cats or whatever. Of course, there's no evidence whatsoever for this thing. However, the left, and of course, obviously, the far left you go, the one, the worse it gets, right? They love to believe in the idea of the blank slate theory. They love to believe in that idea because then they can force humans to be whatever they want, right? They have this, it's a very communistic idea, I think, in general, that have the concept of, well, if everyone's a blank slate, I can force them to be anything, right? If everyone has no inherent skill, anyone can be a scientist, anyone can be a professor, and so on, right? But the reality is some people are too stupid to be a professor of science or whatever, like of STEM or something. Yeah. No, some people can't be that. And likewise, some people can't have physical demanding jobs and so on. We have different skills, we have different attributes, right? And on a side note, I always recommend people to find your skill, right? I always recommend people, as a life coach thing here, find your skill. Don't force yourself to begin with something you're terrible at. Like, no, I have to say I'm a little bit deterministic in my viewpoint. I'm like, everyone is born with certain skills, and preferably try to maximize that skill you are the best at, right? So, like me personally, I am very good with analyzing stuff. Right? I'm very good with numbers. I'm very good with memorizing graphs and figures. So I'm probably gonna be pretty good at working with science stuff, analyzing stuff. It's what I do for a living. It's pretty good in that. Yeah, inherently very, very good at that, right? And also meant that, for example, when I went to university, I can say university because I'm European. It was super easy, right? I inherently very good at subjects, so I didn't study at all, basically. I just passed them all easily, right? Yeah, I was inherently good at it, right? It's kind of like just my skill, right? And same on the same time, I have friends. They went to my university or other universities, so on, right? And they failed miserably. And one reason why isn't because they were lazy or whatever, it's because there was not in their behavior at all. And again, I said, I am a game theorist. I mentioned it earlier, so all right. But it's a little bit like, well, if you always hated math, maybe you shouldn't go to a STEM degree or something, right? Maybe you shouldn't try now. I don't know. It's kind of weird to me, yeah. It's a lot of this weirdness I find with people where they have this epiphany suddenly. They're going to do something, and I'm just like, but you have no ability for that. Why are you trying to do that suddenly? It doesn't make any sense. I don't want to be that guy. This is another video that's posted now, but you get my point. Inherent matters. DNA matters. Gender, whatever, matters. You're born with certain skills and certain attributes, and saying you aren't is completely crazy talk, right? That being said, and I want to put that very, very clearly here and emphasize, this is of course a nurture versus nature debate now, right? One of the most classic debates when it comes to behavior and science is called nurture versus nature. You are really, really, really stupid if you think it's only nurture. But you're also really, really stupid if it's only nature. Of course, people have a nature. You're born with skills and attributes, and then depending on how you live, your parents, your school, your friends, that will shape your skills and attributes, right? But honestly, that's why I have a huge problem usually with far left people, right? Because they tend to have this incredible hardcore belief in the tabula rasa, blank slate, which means they purely believe in nurture, which is just crazy talk. Of course, it's not only nurture or nature. Doesn't make. Of course, it's a mixture of both. And every scientific person, every research proves there is a mixture of both, right? Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be a mixture of both, right? One of my favorite videos in my life is a Norwegian documentary called Hjärnvasken, basically brain scramble, I would say in English. But anyway, in this documentary, it's a very good documentary. You can find on YouTube, yeah, amazing. Hjärnvasken, it's one of the best things I think I've ever seen in my life. In an interview list with a Norwegian, what is she, like a social something? She's something, humanitarian, I guess. But anyway, the reporter, the guy making the video, he's interviewing this professor down in Norway, and he asks her about nurture's nature, right? And she's just like, no, but of course it's all nurture. She's like, it's all nurture. He's like, but what's your evidence of that? Like, what's your actual evidence? So he's been, talking to all the professors, right? They'll be like, oh, it's a mixture of both. And he's like, it's only nurture. He's like, what's your evidence? I believe so. He's like, okay, but why do you believe that? Why would it be like 100% only nurture? That seems to me like an extreme viewpoint. She's like, of course it's like, it's 100%. I'm stupid then. And that, of course, made her be ridiculed in Norway massively. She got fired, or she lost like some money or whatever. But basically, the point is that her behavior there, right, is a classic extremist behavior. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. Why would it be 100%? And when he then, of course, keeps asking her, right, because he's like a comedian actually, not a normal journalist, so he's more like, keeping on the point, she can't handle that, right, because she's used to, I guess, never being really, questioned, right, so to speak, full of questions. And he's just like, oh, no, but I believe it. Like, why do you believe it that for? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And she keeps being 100%, right? It's a very hardcore doubling down. This is something that's very, very common, of course, on far and I also put it out here. This is very common on both far right and far left, right? People tend to double down on their beliefs, right? But for me, then, as a rational scientist, believing anything is 100% either way is really stupid. Like I said, it's really stupid. Why would it be 100% nurture, right? Doesn't make sense. But like I said, it's also going to be 100% nature. Like, you're born and this is a skill you have and you can't learn anything. Because, I mean, if it's 100% nature, it would mean that as a baby you know everything and then you can't ever learn anything. It doesn't make any sense. It's never going to be 100% anything, right? And I guess the yellow point I'm making here is never 100% anything. But anyway, so these people, right, they love to believe in this concept of 100%. I can mold you, humans are just plastic, and I can force you to be anything I want, right? But what that means, of course, is that they end up hating East Asian people, right? They end up hating Japanese people in particular, and also, as I said in the video, use, of course, which is a very classic reason, right? The reason why, of course, is because in every data, in every science, in every country with immigration, Japanese people, Chinese people, Korean people, Vietnamese people, so they get my point there, Taiwanese people, they all are performing better, right, than certain other cultures. So the massive issue, where it really comes from, why they love to say that Japanese are white adjacent, is because Japanese immigrants perform way better, right, than other immigrants in, for example, Sweden. So in Sweden, we have data on this, right? So for example, the crime data for certain demographics are 5 times as likely as a Swede to commit crime, even if they are both equally poor. So basically, take this. Okay, we have the worst neighborhood in Sweden, right? And we have 3 different people here. We have a white man, white man in Sweden. Who could have thought, right? We have a Japanese man, which is also white apparently. So we have 2 white people, I guess. And then we have one from like South Africa and so on. And the crime rate is 5 times higher for the person from Sub-Indonesia and so on, than the Swedish person, right? Even if they have the same economical point, even if they are equally poor and so on. Right? However, the Japanese guy, which is white apparently, is lower chance to commit crime. So they're even less likely to commit crime, even if they're also equally poor as Sweden. So basically, a Japanese poor person in Sweden living neighbors with a poor white Swedish person, right, are less likely to commit crime. So they have a lower tendency to commit crime. However, other immigrants, again, then, right, have a higher tendency to commit crime. And some immigrant groups have a massively higher tendency to commit crime in certain different issues, right? So what that tells you is that socio-economical factors are complete bullshit. Because again, if you have a poor Japanese person and a poor person from Sub-Saharan Africa, the Japanese person is much, much more likely to get a good job, get a good degree, and also not commit crime, right? Regardless of any white people in it. That being said, of course, now they are white also, Japanese people are white, so like whatever. I mean, say a white person, yeah, whatever. Get my point. It's like, no, it is the biggest issue, right, that the left, especially the far left, but it's generally the left actually. Not even the far left, it's generally the left. It's true, for example, in Sweden, where, Sweden is very left-leaning and large majority left, so right, they have this incredible love, right, for socio-economical factors. But like I said, right, socioeconomic factors are completely bullshit, and it's been disproven over and over again. Because every time when you take a poor East Asian person with a poor, like whatever, from any other region, they perform better. They perform better than even white people, you know what I mean? They perform better than the inherent poor people, right? Think about that, yeah. East Asian people actually have a better tendency to live in poor neighborhoods than the actual people from that country. They're born in that country. And of course, the inherent people that are born there, this case white people, they have a much higher, better status or whatever, right, than the other immigrants. But again, the East Asian immigrants are outperforming the native population, right? And of course, the native population is better than. So it's like, yeah, that's massive difference, right? Which of course then means that they are basically white, right? They're super white. So if anything, Japanese people are more white than white people are, because they actually perform better in white societies. And that's the truth, right? Think about that. In America especially, lot of data for this thing in America, that East Asian people are actually more white than white people if you look at it from like a success rate, right? Because they actually do outperform the white natives, even if they immigrant and live in poor neighborhoods. But again then, all other immigrants are basically, underperforming the native white people, right? Which of course is like, well, what could that be about? Well, it's interesting, yeah, what could that be about? Well, obviously, culture matters, right? Commit on video, you all know the answer, everyone knows the answer, even the left deep down knows the answer, that cultures are different. Culture relativism is one of the dumbest things ever. One reason I say it over and over again, I have a bias, I guess. I have a bias, I suppose, against cultural relativism and communism, whatever. Right? But it doesn't make any sense to believe that every culture is equally good or equally bad or whatever, right? And we can always take the extreme examples of cultures that have human sacrifice or whatever, right? That sounds pretty stupid. So no, those cultures aren't very good, right? But of course we can explain that to cultures that aren't that stupid, but they have other issues, right? And then we have better cultures. Of course, culture really matters. It's very interesting, of course. We can talk about it for 10 hours, my whole day, my whole life talk about this thing, right? But the general obvious issue, why it's happening, is of course, as I mentioned earlier, because East Asian culture values stuff like getting a high degree, stable, staying married, saving money, investing, and all this stuff, right? Delayed education is highly valued in East Asian culture, even more so, of course, valued than in European cultures, right? That being said, they're quite similar, of course, and that's why East Asian culture looks very white, right? And also, of course, why they perform better in white cultures. If anything, it makes kind of obvious sense, right? Even when just looking from a very, very, very simplistic standpoint, why wouldn't, for example, Japanese people perform better in Sweden than someone from, let's say, Kenya? Why wouldn't they? Because if Japanese culture is much more similar to Swedish culture, which it absolutely is than Kenyan culture, then the logic would be that, yeah, the Japanese immigrants will probably, perform better because they will probably do the similar things they are doing, right? Of course, I don't want to make a video about immigration here, but obviously, and everyone knows this, because people don't want to say it, but everyone knows this, that of course it is easier to integrate immigrants to a country if they have a similar culture to the country. It's pretty obvious. You're barely allowed to say that anymore in today's world, but yeah, it's kind of easy, right? If I have a red pen and then I buy another red pen, so I look more similar. If I buy whatever, blue pen or whatever, the two reds are probably gonna go better together than a red and a blue or whatever. It's the most basic thing ever. If you're taking in people from the similar culture, even the same culture, right? So for example, let's say we had some, I don't know, World War III or whatever, right? And people are gonna immigrate then to let's say Norway, okay? Who would be the best immigrant for Norway to take in, right? From an easier like integrational standpoint, but obviously it would be like Danish people, Swedish people, and Finnish people, and also probably Icelandic, right? Because they basically have the same culture. Not only that, as a Swede, you can talk to Norwegians in roughly the same language. We can understand each other. No, I'm fluent in all those languages, but anyway, I'm fluent in both Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish. But ignoring that, it's like as a Swede, you can understand half Norwegian kind of automatically, and vice versa, right? So it'll be much easier to integrate because you already know the language, you have the same religion, the same culture. This is basically very, very obvious, right? Like I said, I don't want to derail this video, but it is to some extent, though, honestly, I think so, to be very fair here. I think it is not maybe like, how do I say it? To be fair, right? It is not that strange that East Asian cultures are outperforming other immigrants in like, Europe and America and so on, right? Because again, they have a much more closer culture. So from that standpoint, again, they're obviously gonna perform better, right? As an average, on the whole macro level, because like they are gonna fit in there, right? But it comes back to what I said earlier, right? And I know I'm being a little bit broken now, but it obviously comes back to what I said earlier, because they are much more similar. That then the people are gonna hate them, right? Because they're white adjacent. But they actually are white adjacent from a cultural standpoint. That's the funny thing about it, I suppose, right? They actually are white adjacent from a cultural standpoint and a behavior standpoint, right? Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and so on are white adjacent in the sense that they have the closest culture to white people, right? Technically speaking, absolutely. However, what that means that if you go back to like this current controversy, with of course the not samurai Yasuke, what that means, of course, though, is that, they have this tendency, right, these people, to say that, well, of course, it's okay to be angry or hateful, right, against these people, because they're basically white, right? So that's kind of the core issue, I suppose, in this case, that I find it so, like, it's like tragic funny for me, right? I'm honestly laughing, crying kind of thing when I'm reading these topics, right? When I'm reading people on Ubisoft defending why they're playing with the black guy in Japan, right? And they're basically, like I said earlier in the video, they're like, well, we didn't want more white main characters, right? It's funny, dumb funny, yeah. We don't want more we don't want more white people to be the main characters, And it's like, okay, so you're basically literally saying that you view Japanese people as so much white adjacent that they're white now, yeah. So you're replacing Asian people because they're basically white anyway, so it's fine. It's fine, it's fine. You have white people as a main character. It's like sadly hilarious, I think, in a way. But it's also, and as I mentioned earlier, also very predictable, right? And that's one thing I really, really dislike the thing. To keep saying, also because it's kind of boring, It's boring, I feel. And now when I go a little less from this scientific, historical person here as I am. But honestly, from a personal standpoint, I find it really boring. I find it really, really boring that you're going to have like, oh yeah, of course you're going to take in Yasuke. You know what I mean? When I first heard about this trailer, because obviously I don't buy Ubisoft games, they're all terrible. And regardless of this thing, it's all terrible. So I would never watch this trailer voluntarily in my life, right? So to speak. But a friend sent me this trailer and said, oh, you're gonna love this trailer, right? You're gonna love this trailer! And before I even had viewed the trailer, right? Him telling me that this is a trailer in Japan done by, white people in Ubisoft. I thought, oh, it's Yasuke, right? I immediately knew, before I watched the trailer, there's gonna be that black samurai, right? I knew it's gonna be him, because it is predictable. It is boring. It is pandering, of course, to the maximum ultimate degree. But it really is boring, isn't it? Like, I knew immediately that, oh, if you wanna pander and do Vogue, DA stuff, whatever, right, in Japan, well, obviously, you're gonna pick Yasuke. I already seen the Yasuke anime. It's one of the worst anime in my life. It's incredible anime. I've seen him in, Neo. I've seen him in all the video games. He's the token black guy. That's what I'm saying. He's the token pandering black dude, right? So as soon as my friend tells me that, oh, the new Japanese trailer is gonna have an interesting main character, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's Yasuke, right? It's like it, right? It's super boring. It's incredibly boring. It's like the most uncreative, shitty thing ever to do. If you wanna be creative, you wanna be Vogue, you wanna be DEI, Why not take one of the Otokunokos, right? But take one of those yaoi dudes, take one of those gay guys that was a samurai that was doing Oda Nobunaga, and then they betrayed him, and then they were this, or they got betrayed or whatever. Like you could actually find a lot of these like straight up like homosexual characters or whatever, right, in Japanese samurais, and that would be a lot more interesting, perhaps a little more creative, right? Or make you can do a lot of stuff. I'm here to give you freaking tips. Make my point. It's using Yasuke is boring. It is the most go-to laziest thing to do ever, right? And it's very predictable. And then it comes to this general thing, of course, in the video game industry. I thought about that for many years now. Is that it's more and more boring, right? One reason why, and this is an offshot, but I want to point out here, is because the companies are more and more afraid, right? Companies are more and more afraid of taking chances of doing unique stuff and so on, right? And they tend to just go in for the most simplistic stuff ever. Usually that, of course, means franchising and just doing the same game over and over again. Another reason why I don't buy these games from Ubisoft, because they are the same game over and over again, and they're all pretty terrible, let's be honest here. But anyway, but it also means, right, they are actually cowards, right? They are 100% cowards. Ubisoft using Yasuke, the token black dude, is a cowardly move. Not only is it not creative, it's cowardly too, right? Like I said, why not have an actual gay samurai? One of the many Otokunoko kind of geishas for men and so on, right? Make it interesting, have a cross-dresser Otokunoko, cross-dresser samurai dude, seducing men, right? As types of women, then killing them with assassination, right, in the bedroom. Make it interesting, If you're gonna be Vogue DI and so on, you can actually be way more interesting. This actually happening in Japan. You can actually make a much more cooler, interesting characters, right? But no, you went with the most banal, super pandering, that black dude that we've seen in like 50 other games, right? It is super, super boring. Very, very uncreative and cowardly, right? That's what I mean. It's interesting because it really is a coward's move in the sense that, like I keep saying, these companies are so afraid, right, of doing anything new, so they're just like, it's just a guy, like it's just predictable. And I think that if we go away from Ubisoft, yes please, and talk about the general, of course, industry and movies and so on, right, that's also, of course, why people really dislike this thing, right, in a general standpoint. I'm not talking about why people like it now, but in a general standpoint, and also why this controversy happens, right, because if you look at the people that dislike them, Yasuke and so on, right, and the whole samurai and so on, they are not, of course, racist. No, they aren't. I mean, some of them are, of course. I mean, sure, 1% are probably that, right? Whatever. The thing is that most people are obviously completely aware of this is maximized pandering, and everyone knows it's a took guy and so on, and people are tired of it, right? Yeah, people are tired of it. People are very, very tired of these companies just obsessively always trying to be woke, right, so to speak. And then, of course, the woke people themselves are obsessively automatically mode, right? So one thing I want to point out, though, in this context here, it's very interesting, is the whole Wikipedia thing, right? How it's been changed so many times and so on. But it's just hilarious because, for me as a behavior scientist, what I'm most laughing at, so to speak, what I call it, in this like context here, is not how like the right and right is like Yasuke, right? They're like, no, it's how the left people have this like damage control mode that just basic facts doesn't matter for them, right? So you talk to a person that are like, oh, Yasuke samurai, like, but he wasn't a samurai. He was this thing, not that thing, right? As I mean, on the video, you can easily prove that he wasn't. The evidence doesn't prove that, and you can point it out, right? And they got into this, as I mentioned earlier, doubling down and so on, right? So I think that's also why this thing has become a bigger controversy, perhaps, than a similar game in the past, right? Because, like I said, the one side is really tired of this token pandering, right? And it's so obvious they're doing it. And again, everyone kind of gets they hate Asian people. And I said it on the videos too, right? But to me, it's very, very clear that the further we go into this cultural thing that's happening, right, for the last few years now, especially the last 5 or 6 years, it's very clear that they, hate Asian people, right? The whole white Asian thing. That's why they hate Stellar Blade and other games with like hot Asian people, because it's very, very Korean and they hate it, right? I said in my, Stellar Blade video, yeah, it's very, very Korean, so they hate it. And it boils down to like very open racism against Asian people, right, from these other people, which is kind of, very weird because they will claim they are the champions of equality or whatever, but of course they aren't. But that is one thing that I think other people, like for example me then, and other white people, right? No, but you get the point. Other people have picked up on, right? Everyone knows that. Everyone knows. It's so obvious. It's so transparent. So I think that people in this case that are like, oh come on, another like token black samurai dude, come on, yeah. And that of course then starts, this side to be like, okay, we're gonna clamp down that, right? And on the same time, then you have the left and the other side being incredibly like damage control mode, right? Yeah, and they have zero facts on their side. And it is an interesting thing, I think, from a general standpoint. I think it's interesting to view, honestly. Sitting and laughing a bit there, because it's like, Jesus Christ, man. It used to be, I find it interesting, it used to be when I was a kid, the left usually was more fact oriented, right? It was more like, well, the right say this thing, like vaccines, but we are against them, and this is the right thing, here's the facts, right? But these days, because it's moved, I guess, so far left, I think in a general way, right, it's because the whole culture has moved so much left. I mean, everyone is more left than it used to be 20 years ago. The reason now is like, well, now the left has gone so much further in the extremity that facts are gone, right? But honestly, I find it interesting. As a kid, I would say that the right wing side, so to speak, were less fact based and more emotional, and more like morale and more religious based, right? And the left were like fact based, more so. And now I feel the left, because I'm generalizing here, but now the left is like super non fact based, and the right are sometimes fact based. Honestly, I'm gonna sit here and say that they're also fact based, but you get my point. This to me is a perfect step, but also where I'm like, yeah, this guy don't care about facts at all. Yeah, this care about winning their agenda, right? But from a behavior standpoint, I think it comes from that like super knee-jerk reaction to I have to win this thing no matter what, right? No principles. Very similar to I guess that professor in Norway. I forgot her name, or I don't want to talk about her name, whatever. Yeah, like no, I'm right, you're wrong, kind of thing. It's like no, but you have no evidence, has the fact against you. Well, I'm 100% right. Like, what makes you say that? It's like I believe in myself, kind of thing. It's like, oh, I see, you're insane, right? That kind of behavior is. Very common, right, on the left, and I think that that is another video per se. But if I explain it very very briefly here, right, that comes from that whole like idea of well, I'm right and you're wrong, but rather more on like how say it, the end justifies the means, right? It is a certain viewpoint that is much more common with left-leaning people from a behavior standpoint than right-leaning people. You can look at the big five, you can analyze why and so on. That's on the video explaining why, but basically for people on the left, right, being like whatever I say doesn't matter as long as I win, right? That is much more a left-leaning behavioral standpoint than for right-leaning standpoint. No, I'm not saying that right-wing people also aren't willing to do whatever they can to win, but certainly for the left in general, of course, I'm generalizing, for the left, it is much more common to just value winning no matter what, right? And that's why the whole idea of facts doesn't really matter, because as long as I'm winning, right? As long as I push my agenda, right? And that this is always been a thing, right? Because being left, you can look at Big Five and be like, well, it's more behavioral, it's more progressive, right? So it's more about like changing the outcome than why you got it, right? And I think it's interesting because I guess you can look at it. Jerry Seinfeld made this really good speech on Duke last week, right? Or maybe this week, whatever. And very recently, and he said this thing, a classic, idea of like what's important in life tend to be actually the journey, right, and not the destination, right? But of course, what I'm saying now is these people on the left usually are much more inclined to believe in the destination, right, rather than the journey. They don't care how they got to A, B, or C, or whatever. They just want to get to A, and they don't care really how they got there. So any means justifies them, right? They will lie, and so on, much easier. But I think that the right-leaning people are actually more caring about the journey. It's like how did I get here? Did I keep my integrity or whatever? Right? Did I retain my honor, so to speak? Right? how did I actually get to my destination? Is more important for them, and that's I think we see this kind of mislap too with like historical accuracy and so on, because they're much more tendency to use, they don't care at all, right? Because the left, in this case, and very far left, they have no care at all for historical evidence. I mean, I personally care a lot about that, right? Now, I would never buy an Ubisoft game anyway, of course. I hate games, but no, I care about that. And on that topic, I mean, you see the general. I mean, it's like, no, I don't care about the games at all. But I think, for example, that could be the Neo. Neo is a game where you are half demon. You can fly, you can transform, you ever as a spirit animal. And someone like, no, Assassin's Creed is like not realistic, but it's not that super crazy either. Yes, you do have some myth enemies, some of them, but they're more like, down to earth to speak. I think that has to be important too. You can't just ignore that. What is the setting part here, right? And of course, the biggest thing is, I guess, that Ubisoft themselves said that this is an historical based character. So, yeah, there's also an issue. But another day, right? That is also, of course, I think a cultural clash here. I don't bring it up to be like, oh, the left and the right. No, I bring it up because another thing, of course, that why the left doesn't like Asian, why you explain the part about, right or wrong or whatever, right? Or carrying about facts. It's because, of course, Japanese culture in this case, then, but also, Korean and Chinese are also, of course, more fact-based culture. Right? They're much more STEM-based, right? In Japanese culture and so on, East Asian culture, right? They have a much higher tendency to respect, teachers, education, as I mentioned earlier, government, much more love for government, right? It's like Scandinavia, much higher love for government, and generally speaking, then they have a much higher respect for STEM, right? And if anything, China, actually, because Chinese ministers tend to be actual scientists, right? Even in white cultures, we tend not to maybe have like the educational whatever, or like the the minister of chemistry, so to speak, should probably be a chemist, right? That's not the case in every country, in some countries, you have that, the energy minister is an actual like PhD in energy, so to speak, right? But in some countries it isn't. But in China, they take it very seriously. So in China, basically, every minister, there's like a kind of science minister, like the minister of energy, has like a PhD or two PhDs. They're all very hardcore, knowing how about nuclear power plants or whatever. They actually know their stuff, right? So in those cultures, they take facts very, very seriously, right? Much more seriously. Yeah, if any culture that takes facts seriously is East Asian cultures, right? And who doesn't take facts seriously? Left-leaning cultures, yeah. They take emotions over facts. Another reason, of course, why they would hate is Asians, right? And what other culture is less fact-based than East Asian, but still, yeah, white culture. You know what I mean? Yeah, of course. So white culture, and I haven't even been up in this video, but also, of course, Jewish culture. Jewish culture is also very scientific. There's a lot of PhDs people, a lot of papers published, right? Israel is very, very leading, right, in publishing papers, and obviously Israel, compared to any other country in that region, is by far the most scientifically based culture with all the papers. Another reason why the left doesn't like them, right, because those guys are the only like successful, STEM country in the MENA region by far, right? So those kind of stuff, of course, also provokes, the people against them, right? And again, it's an adjacent thing because it's similar to white culture, but also values merit and facts and so on higher than perhaps your emotions, right? But anyway, that's the video, guys. I could talk about it for a very long time, of course. I just want to cover mostly the whole why are they white adjacent, and funny enough, they kind of are white adjacent, right? I mean, yeah, Japanese culture, Chinese culture, Korean culture, so on, is much more similar to actually European culture than it is to most of the Asian culture, actually, right? And then the other cultures in like Southeast Asia, Thailand, so on, Burma, Myanmar, and then I heard the names. They're kind of like, they're a little closer, I guess, to East Asian culture, but not completely yet. And they're also then closer to like white culture, but not as much. No, for example, I mean, a country in like Southeast Asia is usually closer in a behavior culture standpoint than a country in like Africa, right, to Europe, for example. So they are somewhere in between there, right? Yeah, they're not as similar, but they are somewhere between. Again, look at the cultural map; it's very clear how they look there. This is, of course, not the culture map isn't like one-on-one perfect science for every country in the world, of course, but it gives a good indication. And one way to understand is very religious based, right? I said earlier, religion very important for this thing, right? For example, again, then Protestant countries in Europe, right? So Scandinavia and England are more similar to each other than they are to Catholic countries, right? And then you can look at other religions, other regions of the world, and compare them. And usually you will find that countries with a similar religion have a similar cultural standpoint, right? Even if those countries are on different parts of the planet or whatever, right? So usually the baseline for culture is religion, and then if you have a secular society, of course you're going to be more similar to other secular societies, right? Which again, the East Asian culture is also very secular, so that's a huge reason why they're so similar today, right? But from a historical aspect, of course, the reason they are secular is, of course, perhaps that they're religion, right? To some extent, we also have, like, for example, communism in China is banning religion. But there's another video, yeah, they also have that they remove religion. But still, though, right, it's a very different part of the world, can still be similar to each other if they have, similar cultures and backgrounds and so on, right? And when I say background, of course, I don't mean background as in I mean more like a religious background, more as a cultural growth background, not like a background as in who led them or something. Or something like that. But yeah, the video, subscribe, slap it, whatever. Next video is gonna be me dressing up as a samurai, watching Demon Slayer. So because basically I'm Asian, it's white, same thing. So I am dressing up as my ancestor, I guess. And so you guys can have a great day.